Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Brian the Ride Mechanic channel. How the heck are you doing today? So on today's video, I wanted to talk about this time of year. Your park's probably closed now. Some people, no, my park's 24, my park's open year round. It's like, okay, a lot of people, their park is closed right now during the winter time and they're under rehab or refurbishment, whatever you want to call it. So what happened getting to this point? So I want to talk about that. So I want to talk about how we start rehab. Let's get into it.
Now get ready. Here we go.
Thank you for coming back to watch another video. I do appreciate it. Those of you, if it's your first time here, hey, why don't you like and subscribe? And let me know some video ideas that you want to see coming up in the future. I try to release something once a week. I always enjoy making these videos. I love talking about this stuff. I had 14 years in the industry working on it. Some of the best years of my life, honestly. And just like a lot of people, when they do fun stuff like that, I can't shut up about it. I keep talking about it more and more and more. Even every day at work, people are like, oh my gosh, he's talking about rides again. It's like, yeah, I'm talking about rides again. All right, so the winter time has come. Some parks shut down for the winter time, and it's kind of an interesting process. So you say, well, what happens? How does the park get up to that point maintenance-wise? Like, what do we do? Where do we reach that point at? It's like, well, this point actually started at the start of the full-time season. So when the park was finally up and running, in a lot of parks that happens around May, June, somewhere in there, when that park was up fully running, once we got all the rides up and running and everything else, all the mechanics got busy with the day-to-day. Okay, we got to start doing the PMs daily, weekly, monthly. We got to get all those and start hitting them hard and heavy and make sure that that ride's going to be there for 3, 4, maybe 5 months consistently to make the guests very happy, make operations happy, the park happy, and more importantly, to put money back into the park to make sure those people keep coming back and they keep dumping more money into the park, because that is the end goal of all this. The park provides rides to go on and a good time, and people provide money for those rides. So that is the arrangement that we have worked out. So what happens is that as the park was up and running in the heat of the summer, right around July, somewhere like that, myself being a supervisor at the time, that is when I started rehab. And that's when I started my winter refurbishment schedule. These schedules and the depth of them vary, of course, by the type of park it is. What type of park is it? Is it a regional park? Is it something else? Is it a little mom and pop company that hardly has anything? Is it a big corporation? That is the basis of the refurbishment. So it's like, I'm going to walk through what I would do to start rehab. And for those in the rehab, that is what we always called it. When we shut the park down, a lot of times when I first started working there, the park was down from November, the beginning of November, all the way through till about April of the next year. Park was shut down during that time frame. The park wanted to open more and more and more, so we started narrowing that window down further and further and further and further until eventually we hit weekend operation all year round. The park never shut down at that point in time. Adaptive scheduling for myself for that one. But it was something that could be done and wasn't that bad too. So around the July time frame is when I started doing my morning walks. And I would go out to the mechanics on their primary days when the mechanics were at their ride. They knew what was going on with it, the ins and outs. And I would go to each mechanic for about that full month of July and start talking with them about what needed to happen to the ride. And there are several things that we touched on. The first one was the trains. Train rehabs are actually pretty straightforward. They're fairly unchanging. There's not really much to those things that happens different from year to year unless you find big problems in areas, then that might warrant like big part replacement the next year around. But you have about a year to plan for those. So this is more things like the SLC I would work on they had these big bushings inside the housing. And each year we took those bushings out, sometimes midway through the year, and those bushings were completely trashed. So each year we talked about doing something different. And that was the time, those were the type of things that I would write notes down. It's like, okay, the vertical bushings, I'd have to go in there and find out what I had to do different to the vertical bushings. So when I made my way back to the office that day, I would sit down and I'd open up an email to Vacoma. And I'd say, hey, these bushings, which those particular ones were made of Oricot, these Oricot bushings, fiberish, these bushings were pretty much trash every year. And the tolerances were blown out of proportion, which caused lots of downtime on the ride midway through the year, because we literally had to take the seat hangers, swing them down out of the way, and stick a giant socket underneath the bottom of the pin to loosen the spanner nuts and then tighten them up, to tighten the whole assembly up to keep the frames from shaking really hard. So each one of those assemblies to do would probably cause the ride to open up about an hour and a half to anywhere between an hour and a half and 3 hours late for the day, which nobody wanted. So that was a high maintenance item that we really had to look into, and we put up with it for a really long time. Kept thinking, well, if we did the right this or the right that, we can get it to work. But each year we couldn't get it to work, and each year we were tightening them up. If you've worked on SLCs, you know what I'm talking about, on that big vertical spindle pin, trying to keep those bushings in line inside there. So I would go back to my office and we talk about, okay, these vertical bushings, what can we do? And I went to Vacoma and I gave them their part numbers and I said, here's the problem that we're having. And I would tell them that these were coming out of tolerance. We were having the things were mushroomed out by the end. Every year, completely replacement. And they would go through the normal stuff with that type of stuff. They'd come back and say, well, are you putting enough grease in them? Are you using the right pre-installation? How are you putting the pins installed? Like all those things. And one year I contacted them and said, hey, what do you have as far as different stuff to put inside there? And I just so happened to contact them on a year when they had just started remaking those bushings out of brass. So a brass copper mixture that goes inside there, and that's what most of the other bushings on the rides are made out of, is that brass copper type material. Very sturdy and stout stuff. And they're like, yeah, we just started making those out of these. And I'm like, ooh, okay, I want to buy those. Because you can shoot yourself in the foot really easy when you do upgrades and retrofits and things like that. That first year I bought enough to do one train worth, because I just wanted to see how they went together. And then if they really messed up bad for some reason through the year, we could take them out and then we just had one train down while we were trying to repair that stuff and get it back to the old style bushing. I would contact the manufacturer about that stuff. And then as we were going along there, I would also talk with the mechanics, say like, well, how's the lift hill holding up? How are the brakes holding up? And then the mechanic would say, well, let's see, I've got 7 brakes that are worn and they're going to need replacing soon. And I go, well, it's July. 7 brakes worn that need replacing soon. That's not going to make it till rehab. That's going to need to be done soon. Yep, that's going to need to be done soon. It's like, okay. Any other problems in the brakes? Nope, no other problems out there. What about the lift hill? Nope, everything's working good on the lift hill. Nothing there. I'm like, okay. The bottom part of the lift hill where the anti-rollback rail wears the most. Get me the measurements on those, because I want to make sure that that rail is still thick enough down there and we aren't going to run into any surprise problems when we take the ride down. Like, by the way, the whole anti-rollback rail needs to be replaced. So they would let me know that information. The Major Rollercoasters they're obviously your high draws. That's where the crowd comes. That's where they want to see the focus. They want it running and they want it all up and working. They're also a lot of times the easiest to maintain, because they're, okay, well, all those components are big. They don't wear. If I'm replacing chain liner inside of the chain trough, it's probably because I'm putting in a new chain and new sprockets, so just everything is being done at the same time. So you don't have a lot of that stuff that just has to happen independently, But the smaller the ride gets on the other side, the more that does happen. So you would just be going down to a ride and it's like, okay, what do we need to do on this? Oh, we need to do this, we need to do that. And then as you pulled it apart, you found something that was worn way down on the inside. It was like, ugh, that's not good. Contact engineering, it's like, hey, we have this wear. Have you guys seen this before? Sometimes it's oh yeah, we have a repair procedure for it. Here it is. Go ahead, repair it, NDT it, you're back up and running. Sometimes it's like, no, we haven't seen that either. We have to contact the manufacturer and say like, hey, like Zamperilla. A lot of the small rides we had at the park were made by Zamperilla. So contact Zamperilla. Hey, have you guys seen this before? What do we do? And most of the time Zamperilla is like, oh yeah, we've seen that. That's a normal thing. Here's this, here's that. Sometimes they warrant a repair for it. They say, yeah, go ahead and whatever this is, build it back up. Here's some parts, maybe whatever. Go ahead and replace it or repair it. And sometimes it is, no, we can't warrant a repair for that. So you're going to have to replace that assembly, whatever it might be. Depends on what it is, really. But the smaller rides are much more of a hit and miss. That's why if you're going around small flat rides, kiddie areas and stuff like that, sometimes you'll see a ride just go down at the end of the year and it just stays down for a long time. That's because we tore into it, found a big problem, and it wasn't something just like, oh yeah, put it back together for the next weekend. It was like, nope, that's going to be down for a while. So on roller coasters, we would move around from ride to ride, and I would start the refurbishment for each ride. So there was stuff like the SLC and the Boomerang. Our particular corporation I was underneath, they had what was called a group buy. Since we had a bunch of parks in the system, well, all the parks got together and bought all the parts from Vekoma all at the same time. Vekoma saved an arm and a leg in shipping internationally, and so they passed that savings on to us. So we got a discount. I guess it was just a shipping discount on that when we called it the Vekoma group buy. So we bought that stuff from them. I don't think the price of the stuff wasn't discounted at all. If I recall, I buy stuff on the group buy and buy stuff by itself throughout the season, and the price was the same. I believe they were saving money on all the shipping because when you have an entire corporation buy stuff at one point in time, they're not shipping boxes, they're shipping containers, like steel containers of stuff at that point, because that is a lot of material moving out of there for the whole thing. But let's say for like a B&M, it was the same thing as that. You go up and you start looking at long distance wear on all the components, chain trough, the chain itself. We would have that would also be about time of year. In the morning time before the park opened, we'd have a representative of the chain manufacturer come in and start to measure the chain itself. So on the weekly, we would go to most rides and measure chain stretch. That was where you measure between, let's say, like 20 links of the chain, and it had to be X amount of distance apart, whatever it is, plus or minus whatever the measurement was. Typically done in percentages along the way. But on top of that, we would have the chain's manufacturer representative come in and look at the chain and tell us what kind of condition the chain was in. Now, insurance loved that because they would come in, like a lot of our chains were made by mainly Reynolds and a lot from U.S. Sabaki. So U.S. Sabaki would come in, a representative would anyway, and they would look at the chain itself. They would measure their stretch, they would measure it themselves, and tell us how much the chain had stretched or had worn eye to eye over the entire length of it, which typically measured up with what we measured ourselves. So it was comforting to know we got the same measurements out of that. And then they would tell us just how the chain is doing. The chain is doing good. It's not doing good. You guys need to put more lubrication on it. You guys need to change the type of lubrication on it. Why is this? Why is it getting rust in here? It's like, okay, well, and then we would go over everything. A lot of rides had auto lubers that would put the oil on the chain while the lift was going. So it was maybe like, oh, maybe we need to take the auto luber apart and check to make sure it's Well, the brushes are still feeding out oil onto the links. Something like that might be. It might be something weird, like for some reason they're like, hey, everything's good except for there's about a 50-foot section of chain that's worn down really far. Those would be very big red flags for us, because really? The whole thing's good, but there's a 50-foot section that's worn down? Like, that's bad news right there, because that's something you want to get in there and replace. It's like you can't just have... The fact that you have a random section wearing down is super bad. Like, that should not be acceptable at all. The whole thing should be worn uniformly. Not like, one's going to... Because that means for some reason, depending on where you stop the chain each time to measure it, unless you measure it in that area that you know about, one section could be worn through almost to a catastrophic state. That's not a great thing. A lot of rides, by the way, what you do is you go in there and you get a lot of acetone, stuff like that, and clean off the chain really, really good out of the chain liner to where you could see all aspects of it. And you get a can of fluorescent marking paint, and you paint a section of chain fluorescent orange. And that way, when the mechanic starts inspecting it, they can run the lift under a slow speed and get to that orange marking spot and watch it. And they can say, okay, I'm measuring the chain here. And next time they do it, they could send that spot 100 feet up and then measure the chain again down there. And then the next time they do it, send that spot 200 feet up. And they could start to measure the entire chain all the way around. If the chain's not marked, you don't know where you're measuring. You don't know how much of the chain you've done and how much you haven't done at that point in time. Oh, those little tips help. So the manufacturer would tell us how the chain is doing, and that would give us long-term planning, because while we're also doing this, we're planning a long-term rehab as well, and that's stuff that the park needs to budget for. So that is typically what's in a parks. It's around... They typically do it at different milestones. Some parks are like a 3-year, some parks are around a 5-year. We're looking out at those very long-distance things. And we said, hey, you know what? We've had this gearbox on the side of our B&M that's been in great condition. We've never had anything wrong with it, but we've also never taken it apart to be gone through. Well, to take it apart and send it out, like to send that back there, it's like they want 2 weeks to remove the thing, 2 weeks to reinstall it, and then it's going to be gone at the manufacturer, wherever that is, for 8 weeks while that's down. Well, it's like, well, that's 10, 12 weeks, 3 months of downtime on that ride, and that's the premier ride in the park? No, can't have that premier ride down for 3 months at a time. Well, what happens if that gearbox breaks? The ride's going to be down for 3 months then. And then they would say, well, good point. How fast can we get another gearbox? Hold on, call up B&M and say, I'm looking for a quote with lead time on this gearbox. B&M comes back and says, that gearbox is 23 weeks out. Whoa, almost half a year. Almost half a year out. It's like, oh, okay. So we're looking at 12 weeks of downtime to refurbish the gearbox, 25 weeks out. So the park goes, how about this? We'll use this year for an example. It's 2024 now. So how about this? 5 years from now, which would be 2029, we're going to budget for that gearbox to be replaced. It's like, okay, so when the capital projects come up for that year, they put in the money and they say, we want to budget for this big gearbox to be replaced on this ride, even though we've never even taken it apart and had a problem with it. They want a brand new one put on. It's like, okay, ways down when that happens, we take the old gearbox off, put the new gearbox on, check it, put it into service, the ride's back up and running. In the background, we take that old gearbox and we send it out for that 12-week process. And it goes out and it gets new bearings in it, like it's all of its tolerances checked. Maybe it needed something refabricated for it. put it back together, and now we have the manufacturer of that gearbox say that this thing is good for another lifetime worth of service. We're like, great. We bring it back to the park. We set it up on the shelf, and we go, spare gearbox now. We have that. And some people are going like, no, like, really? You didn't have a spare gearbox for that? Seriously, we did not have a spare gearbox for that. I've seen plenty of YouTube videos on behind the scenes tour stuff that people were going around. I think it was like Manta or something like that, where I had a group back there and they're filming stuff. And all of us that were in this part, we were looking at that video going, they have a whole nother lift motor and gearbox just sitting in the train bay area. Like, what the heck? We see all these big spare parts for the ride sitting there, and we're just like, whoa, they got some spares. That's amazing, because a lot of parks don't, not every park, but I mean, there's a good chunk of parks that don't carry huge spares like that out there. And just if your lift motor or that gearbox craps out, it's like, your ride is down. That is it, until you can get that replaced. And hopefully somebody nearby has something that works, because especially these days with lead time on stuff, it is rough out there. That is a bad one. So we try also during this rehab planning time, we try to look way far out and see things like that might need to be done. A gradual change out of components on the ride is something that's always kind of one of those things that needs to be done. Okay, I want to put new gear motor boxes, booster wheels. I want to put new motor and gearbox combinations on the ride all throughout. It's like, well, there's 25 of them, 26 of them out there. Okay, well, I can't buy 26. And this is where people are like, oh, 5-year project? No. Can't do that either. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy, because they're in clusters of 4, a lot of them, let's say like on a B&M ride, Tacoma's 2, I'm going to buy 4 brand new ones. And they might be cheap enough to where I could budget for them maybe the following year. I'll buy 4 brand new ones. And then every year, the first year, I'm going to put those 4 brand new ones on the ride. And then I'm going to take the 4 old ones off and send them to a professional company to have the electrics redone and the gearbox redone. Like, I'll send them to an SEW representative. SEW is a company that does a lot of the motor gearbox combinations on these rides. A lot of them. So I may certify them. I may have them sent back to SEW for them to redo them. And then they're going to refurbish those 4, send them back. And then I am going to, the next year, take those 4 that I just had refurbished, put them on the ride, take the next 4 off and send them out. So I can make this plan that over the next 5 years, 6 years, whatever it might be for the ride, that I'm now come up with this plan that every year we're going to dedicate $12,000 and send out 4 motors and gearboxes to be rebuilt. And then at the end of that 5-6 year plan, whatever it might be, I can now say that all the drive motors on the ride have been refurbished. They're all good to go. Now, refurbishing things opens up their own can of worms, because sometimes, we take off booster motor number 22. Booster motor number 22, we've never, ever had a problem with that at all. And it's ran for 15 years just fine. Great. Let's refurbish it. So we take it off and we ship it out. Comes back certified, good to go. Put it back on the ride. All right. That weekend, trips a circuit breaker. What's wrong? It's like, oh, I'm not sure. Let's go out there. So we start taking brakes apart and readjusting things on the bottom part of the motor where the brake is down there. We start doing all sorts of stuff. Keeps tripping breakers and things like that, and we cannot figure out why. So, don't know what it is. So then they come back and it's like, well, now we start Frankensteining stuff together. Well, let's see. Take the motor off of that one and put it on that gearbox over there. And then we go, okay, so we take the motor off of that one and we start Frankensteining things together. Well, because I'm troubleshooting. Did the circuit breaker tripping follow that motor? No, it didn't. Okay. In fact, it still tripped the circuit breaker even after we moved that motor. And now it's like, aha, now we have a gearbox problem. So Something happened, don't know who, what, when, why, or where, but we send the gearbox back out. And then this time, instead of just it being sight unseen, we goes back and they go through that gearbox, and then they come back to us and they say, this is what happened to that gearbox. What happened to that gearbox? It's like, for some reason, the casing on the inside of the output shaft is cracked 360 degrees away around. And the whole thing had dropped 3 millimeters. Huh. That's odd. Shipping? I don't know. Don't know where that happened to. Huh. I'm not sure how that happened either. And then I go back out to the ride and I'm like, hey, they're saying that the whole thing was just sunk in and cracked and broken. It's like, anyone know why? It's like, nope, don't know why. It's like, oh, okay. Well, here, get this new motor and let's put that back on. And they grab the booster wheel and they start getting a 4-pound sledgehammer and just going bang, trying to drive the booster wheel down on there. Just bang, bang. I'm like, whoa, whoa. All right, we found out why it was broken. You guys can't hammer booster motors on. You can't hammer the booster wheels on. You have to use hydraulic drive assemblies to push that thing on the shaft. Oh, okay, we'll go grab that next and put that on there. No, you can't even do that because now the bore of that wheel is now screwed up. And wherever you move that wheel is going to screw up everything else from there on out. So what do? It's like that wheel has to go back to the machine shop and we got to see if the machinist can fix the bore. Because if he can't, that just goes straight in the trash at that point in time. And sometimes you find plenty of stuff like that out there, that it wasn't the people that refurbished it. It wasn't from use on the ride. Maintenance, most evil thing out there, maintenance did the destruction on that one. And now whatever it was, hey, you hammering that wheel on there cost $5,700. Like, that's what that cost to hammer that wheel on there. $5,700 plus all this downtime and headache and everything else. And no one from the supervisor on up, no one is happy about that. Trust me. Everyone is sitting there going, oh my gosh, what happened? What did that person do? Oh, can't believe it. But that stuff does happen. It happens a lot out there. Maintenance shoots themselves in the foot a lot of times from doing things like that. All because someone thought it was going to be a time saver. Well, we'll save so much time if we can just bang this on there real quick. You know, sometimes it works. Sometimes they do it in such a fashion where it's like, oh, we're going to bang that down on there. So what do? It's like, well, we went back and we cut a 1-inch plate. We set that on top of there. And then we used a pipe on top of it and welded another plate on top of there. And then we beat the hell out of that thing, pushing it down. Okay, well, you used plates and stuff. Well, that dispersed the load enough to where that probably worked. Okay, but you could still damage the inside of the gearbox and stuff from all the impacting. So if you're a mechanic out there and you haven't figured it out yet, use hydraulic push and pull tools to push booster wheels and things like that on shafts. It's just don't try to beat them with a hammer. Like, don't be a hammer mechanic. Be a measuring mechanic. Don't be a hammer mechanic. It doesn't work in the end. Sometimes, very rare scenarios, but hammer mechanics need to stay working on water rides. Yeah, don't let hammer mechanics work on precision roller coasters. They got to go work on water rides. You take a big hammer and a torch and have at a water ride, because man, that's where they go, is right over there. Whew, they work great in those scenarios. At this point in time, if you haven't already, please make sure that you like and subscribe to these videos, because I'm on my way to 1.3 billion subscribers. I don't have that many right now, but I can always say I'm on my way. Right? On my way. I'm on my way to 1.3 billion subscribers. And that's the number I want to hit. So make sure you like and subscribe, comment, let me know. That all helps the YouTube algorithm stuff. I do enjoy making these videos for people. I enjoy posting them because I just like talking about rides in general. It's fun for me. And I like it when people know about my stuff. That's awesome too. But man, if that YouTube algorithm isn't happy, it's not going to try to show my videos to anybody. But so I want to make the YouTube algorithm happy. Someday I'm going to learn how to say the word algorithm. Hey, I got it that time. Wow. Whew. So like and subscribe, and let me know if you want to see more stuff in the future. If you want to contact me outside of YouTube, you can go ahead and email me, ryantheriotmechanic@yahoo.com. Let's get back to the video. We've done some short-term planning. We've done some long-term planning. And then it's not the mechanic that does this stuff. It's typically a lead/supervisor, someone like myself that's doing it. And I have to go through the manual, and I have to go through line by line and start making orders for everything. I need to order all the hardware that goes to the train. Some manufacturers, they have an actual hardware package that's just like, look, here is our package for your ride. In fact, you just say you want the hardware package, and we will ship you all the nuts, all the bolts, all the locking pins, all the specialized hardware, and all that stuff. It's like, we will ship you everything you need for that thing. Awesome. How much is that? $97,000. It's like, okay, I'm going to push pause on this right there. Let me go check with the finance guy, because I'm not sure if there's enough money in the account to work on this. You know, if I got money in there, but he doesn't have money, I got to make sure that works, you know, because it's just the way my checkbook's set up. That's the way my checkbook's set up. I got to go verify with him that's the way our checkbook is set up for this. Some of you know where I ripped that off from. If you do, let me know. That was actually a skit. But it's just like, ooh, man, we can do better than that. So we start saving money. Well, the way we save money is that they pay me money to sit there and go, okay, well, I need all these M12 by 65 bolts. And it's M12 65, DIN 933. You know, it's a grade 8.8, or maybe it's a 10.9. And then I know, let's like, okay, well, let's see, that times all those locations for the entire train, and then I need 500 of them. And then I say, okay, I need 500, and write that down. And then each year, I make a list. It's basically what that manufacturer had, but it's a rehab list for the entire train. And it's my own order list. So I can go through and I say, yep, I need these this year. Nope, I don't need those this year. Some of this stuff, some of it can be reused. There are areas where you can reuse hardware. Not a lot. Most rides, it's a big no-no to reuse hardware. But some areas you can, some areas you can't. Some things you have to buy specialized from the manufacturer, because you're not going to find it anywhere else. It's something that they built custom for their ride. So locking plates and things like that. So you'd have, basically in the end, there would be an order of, here's everything that's got to come from the manufacturer. Here's everything that's going to come from a nut and bolt supplier. All my nuts, bolts, lock nuts, cotter pins, snap rings, bearings, and then there's a whole other, this is what's going to come from our supplier that sells us all of our bearings and stuff like that. I'll use names here. I don't use them anymore, but at the time, Motion Industries supplied all of our bearings and things like that. And if you're a park out there, plant, I don't care who you are, if you're looking for stuff, bearings, all that stuff, anything that makes things run and you don't know about them yet, check out Motion Industries. No, I'm not getting paid for Motion Industries. They just seem to always be able to get a hold of what I needed, and quick. Every time we needed a chain rep to come out, I contacted Motion. They were our first thing. They were also the first people to quote us the prices for chains. It's like, hey, we need a new chain. It's like, okay, here's the quote price. Most of the time, those chains and things like that come from these suppliers. US Tsubaki, like that, who sold through a company like Motion. We typically actually don't buy them from the manufacturer. But every time we say we're not going to buy a big component like that from the manufacturer, we get raised eyebrows from everyone along and says, well, why? Why are you not buying that from the manufacturer? And then if we choose to say, oh, we want to buy it from US Tsubaki directly, then we need our engineering department to reconfirm and say, yes, that is an equivalent chain. We've put it in that ride before. We have all the supporting documentation, calculations, everything like that that says, yes, it is. Chains are a really big deal. So engineering typically has to have their stamp on it if you're not buying it from the manufacturer itself. But even then, we found that the manufacturer prices were pretty close to the price that we were buying the chain from, like from UST. But manufacturers typically had some like, oh, we have it, but we've got to get it over to the US because it's over in England or somewhere like that. So we've got to get it over to the US, and that's a longer lead time as opposed to Sabaki or someone like that, or even Reynolds maybe in the US has like, yep, we actually have that sitting there ready to go. We can get it to you in a week, no problem. So just depends on what's happening where. So I've made my hardware order. I've made my order for bearings and all sorts of bushings and everything like that. Bushings come typically from the manufacturer. I've ordered all my specialized stuff from the manufacturer. And then it's like, what else? What else can we spend some money on? Well, there's a lot of NDT that has to be organized. As I'm planning my refurbishment for this ride, I am also projecting time. Okay, we're going to take that train down there, and then it's going to take us a week and a half to get it off the track and back into the shop. And then it's going to need 4 weeks of teardown, and then we're going to spend 2 weeks just needle gun and welds and taking the paint back off the welds to where we have bare steel. And then after all that time, we're going to start being ready for NDT at that point in time. The pins that were holding everything together should be ready for NDT as well. So we call up the NDT guys and we say, hey, around this time frame, be ready for this ride. And when we're ready for that, you can come out and get it. So typically the way we worked it is we said, we had this company that worked really good with us. They would come out and they would start the mechanical NDT, and they would start looking at welds on all the frames and everything of the coaches. And then that first day, they would actually pick up the box of pins that went to the rest of the ride too. These were all the axles, pivots, hitch fork couplings, like everything along those lines, all the restraint components. They would pick a box up, which is a big 4x4 by 2.5, 3 foot tall pallet that was boxed in with all these components on the inside. Literally, like probably $150,000 worth of parts on the inside of there. Like solid steel too, the way they all stacked in there, because when they picked up that pallet, they had to bring a flatbed truck, and we put that pallet on the back of the truck. That truck sat down because that thing was heavy. So they would start doing the NDT of the frames, and then they would take that stuff away at the same time. And then while the ride is down, some rides it's easy because you get downtime. If you have a ride with one train, as soon as you pull that train off the track, the ride is down. Nothing else can happen. That's when that same NDT company, we want them to go out there and start inspecting the track too. So we also have to start arranging for the NDT of the track and structure, which means that that company has to provide quotes way in advance so we know how much money to ask for to get them out there to look at track and structure. And they got to go up there, and then those quotes, they get really expensive because they got to have man lifts to access everything. Some areas they need to get remote access and wire up and maybe physically climb on top of tracks and stuff like that. Pretty good. We had a 135-foot man lift, and that got us to most areas, and it got them close enough to other areas where we can do the entire inspection of a really big roller coaster with just about 2 days worth of crane work. And by that I mean the crane would have to come in, they'd set up, and they'd get a special man basket designed to hold people, because that's a whole different safety rating for cranes. And they would grab that man basket, and then they would lift those guys up to a side outside of that 135-foot area that they couldn't get to with the man basket, and they would start doing the bottom sides of the lifts and the return troughs and the tops of the loops and stuff like that. And then they just did that first section of the ride that was all that height and started coming back down. And then once they crossed underneath that 135-foot range, the crane was done at that point in time. It can go off to another ride, different area or something being used. So we have to get all that orchestrated. And then there's other things in there that a lot of parks don't do all the time, but it's the stuff that it's the first thing you see when you get to a ride. It's like, okay, what are we talking about here? Padding. Most parks don't redo the padding all the time. Most parks don't redo an entire train's worth of padding at the same time. They typically do small chunks. So out on the ride, you'll get seats that look like this guy right here, right? And in this area especially, you'll have this black indentation. This looks nasty. When, you know, most people don't stop and look at it, but pretty much every ride right here has it. And what that is that's the foam deteriorating from your head. It's not so much impact to it. It's actually all the chemicals in the hair products, sweat, everything like that, that gets onto that. And it starts to break down that top layer of polyurethane foam. That's what the seats are made out of. So then operations comes by and they're like, yuck. So they pull out their cleaners and start to clean that. Well, this is closed cell polyurethane foam. So as soon as you break that top layer of foam, it starts to get in underneath and it just deteriorates faster and faster and faster as it gets in there. So once you see the color go on foam padding like that, once you see it go, which a lot of times it's black underneath, sometimes it's a different color, but once you get past that first initial color that's right on the front, that very thin layer of this padding that's on there, that seat's trash. There's not much you can do for it. So you have to get new seats. Well, there's like only a couple of companies in the US, in fact in the world, there's only a handful of companies that do this type of padding. So those companies have extremely long waits for things with armatures on the inside of them. So an armature is like, let's say your over-the-shoulder restraint that comes down, that has steel on the inside of it. Well, we don't throw that away. We don't buy new ones. Those get NDT'd. So we send them out to these companies, and they will take the foam off of them, and they will NDT the armature, that steel bar, to make sure there's no cracks in it. They're up to date with the current manufacturer's recommendations. If there was a service bulletin that came out, we forward them the service bulletin to make sure that they know about everything. And then they go ahead, they strip the foam padding off, they take all the old paint off, which is typically where it comes out of the foam padding back there. And then they do all their NDT work and everything and make sure it's good. And then they put those steel armatures back inside the mold and then pour new foam on the inside. And you get a nice fresh foamed restraint that comes out of it. And then the restraint gets shipped back to the park with all the new stuff. Now, when that manufacturer was running good and doing those turnarounds quickly for us, it was at least 9 weeks from the time that padding arrived at their facility to the time when it started to come back. So that did not include travel on each end of it. That was just the time it was there, and 9 weeks was a pretty tight turnaround window. So you can tell, it's like, you know, you can't put a train back together without restraints. Well, I mean, you can, but it's not going to work. You need the restraints to run the train because that's what holds in your water dummies and everything else. So, got to have restraints. Bare minimum, it took you a week of shipping on both ends, 9, 10, 11. So you were almost 3 months with that train being down and just restraint padding by itself. And then a lot of the other components, like this seat right here, this is off an Intamin impulse coaster. This guy is actually made by that company. They make the whole thing. They make the whole seat. It has the steel supports on the inside and everything. They were okay to do that. So that's where these seats came from. But most manufacturers like B&M and those people, they have steel armatures that hold the foam. And then the foam is actually just a piece that can be removed. which is great for cleaning, storage, everything else. It also means you can just buy padding as you need it. Like, I don't have to ship off the lateral supports and the seat back because the company just makes those paddings for the laterals left and right and the seat back. But unfortunately, the seat bottom, the pan as it's referred to, the seat bottom and the restraints have to go out because they have those armatures on the inside that company can't make. That's part of the ride, essentially. So foaming is a big thing. If you have a train that's for foaming, it costs a lot of money and it takes a lot of time to do. So that is definitely one of those things. Like if they say, oh, we want to refoam that entire train, it's like, awesome, great. And they say, but we only want rehab to last 9 weeks. It's like the rehab for just that foam is going to be 9 weeks. Now, can you do everything? Like, yes, we can take that train and tear that stuff apart and ship out the seat bottoms and seat backs and like 3 days ship those things to the manufacturer that does that seat foam and, you know, pay them a bunch of extra money and have a beeline through there. And in hopes that once we start putting the train back together, just before the train is done, all those components come back and then we really quickly put everything back together and get it running. But that's the stuff that dictates how long that train is going to be down for. If you're doing work to the track and structure, whether you need welding, chain replacement, liner replacement, multiple brake replacements and stuff, you can't work on track and structure and have trains running around at the same time. You're like, well, duh. But no, I mean, like the gearbox earlier. If you want to take the gearbox off of that thing, then the gearbox is going to dictate how long the ride is going to be down for. So that's stuff you have to plan for and say, well, like if you want this gone, if you want this gearbox out of there and replaced, it's going to be 12 weeks. And if the park's like, well, we can't handle 12 weeks down that ride, I'm saying, like, this is my smallest component. 12 weeks for that gearbox missing is a good estimate and is the narrowest amount of time. So that is what we have to plan for. If we can't plan for that gearbox to be gone for 12 weeks, the ride can't go down. And then it's just, you're going to wait until it breaks down. Which, hey, plenty of parks out there wait for things just to break down because they're like, yeah, we don't want to plan for it. But they have the money for an emergency. They don't have the money for planning. Funny how that works out, but actually a lot of parks operate that way. So let's see, we've talked about all the bearings, bushings, specialized components from the manufacturers, getting all the hardware together, getting all the foam padding and things like that together for the train. Depending on the park, paint is a different process. I know we could not paint anything in California because there were so many environmental protection laws surrounding how much VOCs can be put in there. So unlike most parks that were like, hey, we have an entire paint department that was grandfathered in and all this stuff, like our park didn't have any of that stuff. We literally gave the mechanics brushes and all the paint, and we literally, after we were done with all the NDT, cleaned it down, the mechanics themselves literally painted the ride back afterwards. But that was done to save time because I said, well, we can paint it back ourselves. It's not the greatest looking thing, but then again, like most people don't pay attention to that at all. And we proved that too. We pulled people that got right off the ride. Yeah, we brought them aside and said, hey, quick question for you. They're like, yeah, like how is the train you're riding on? They're like, oh, it's good. And we were like, how often do you come here? And they're like, oh, not that often. And like, can you tell me what color the train was that you rode on? No. Can you tell me any of the colors of the ride? No. It's like, okay. Typically trains like gel coats, they don't get repainted really. They just keep getting reused and polished out. But so yeah, we would have mechanics repaint the steel frame of the ride, which is a lot of times covered up by a lot of panels and things like that anyway. But that was because we can do our own paint job with rollers and brushes and everything else and get it to look fairly decent. And that tagged no time onto the refurbishment process Or it can go out for sandblasting and painting, come back with a really nice looking paint job on there, but it would tag on an extra 5 weeks on top of that because it had to go out for painting. And people right now are like, oh, we just send ours to the paint shop and then it's done in like a couple days. It's like, you're lucky because not all parks have that option. My park was one that did not have that option. And you're lucky if you got it. Just, so give it to the paint shop. They do a great job. I'm sure they do. Because trust me, you don't want a bunch of mechanics rolling on paint. It does not look good in the end. It doesn't look good at all. But most people, A, don't notice, and B, don't care. As long as the ride's working, that's what they care about. So we kind of come full circle around and say, all right, well, what am I doing now here? We talked about this time of year where I'm saying, I was like, okay, we're starting rehab. What is the supervisor that orchestrated all this? What are they doing now? What is the thing? Like, well, now is when I start planning the end of rehab and getting everything back together and rides operating and inspections done and things like that. At this point in time in the year, I'm already halfway through the summer. That's where I'm looking already. I'm already halfway through the summer. So whatever is going on, your maintenance department is typically about half a year ahead of it. Thinking about it, planning it, doing that sort of stuff. And if they're doing reactive maintenance on rides right now, it's because there was a reaction to something. Something happened. You know, they had to pull out something. They tore the train apart and half the wheel carriers were cracked. And then when they went to repair the wheel carriers, the manufacturer said, oh, those can't be repaired. You got to buy new wheel carriers. Well, that'll set the opening date for a ride way back. And that's something a lot of parks can't recover from either, because there's nothing you can do to speed that process up. And that just looks bad when that happens, but that's a short matter of fact. I think that's been pretty good for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Yeah, I started to go talk about what happens, what do we do before we get rides ready for refurbishment, and not so much the exact process, but the steps we go through before. And I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you future expansion on something, or if you have any fun stories that go along with rehab. Let me know down in the comments, and I will get back to you if I can. I'm Ryan the Ride Mechanic. Have a good day, a safe day. Remember, as always, stay off the air gates. Bye.